I can give you a bunch of reasons why I personally like Arch Linux, why I keep using it, and frankly, why I'm probably never going to leave it, or at least not any time in the foreseeable future. And if you're an established Linux user, why I think you should at least at the bare minimum give it a shot as well. Ultimately though, it's your life, it's your distro, it's your computer, you're the one that has to deal with it, so the decision is up to you. But when making recommendations, I generally avoid both Arch and anything Arch-based, because usually the people asking for recommendations are on the newer side of things, don't really know much about distros out there, and frankly, I don't want to be the person who has to babysit you through the distro, has to be your tech support. That's not for me. I don't got time for that. I don't want to do that. So I don't tend to recommend things like Arch. If I do recommend something, it's usually going to be like a Fedora and Ubuntu, something more akin to that. But with Valve's SteamOS being based on Arch, and that kind of being the green light that a lot of people kind of needed to swap to Linux, but at the same time, they know it's based on Arch, so they're either going to Arch itself or various Arch-based distros like Garuda, CashOS, Manjaro to some extent. A lot of people are going with something Arch-based as a first option. And whilst you can, right, like my very first distro was Arch Linux, you can do it, but on the Arch Linux wiki, in the frequently asked questions section, they do have a bit on why you should not use Arch Linux. Whilst it is a very short section, I do think it's worth expanding upon some of these points. Firstly, you may not want to use Arch if you do not have the ability, time, desire for a do-it-yourself GNU Linux distribution. Whilst this is about regular old Arch Linux itself, you install it, you get a TTY, and you basically got to do everything yourself, not so much to distros based on Arch, things like CashOS, for example. Every so often, something does slip through the cracks. I joke that Arch users have free will because they actually have to make choices about what they want to use. But that really is how it goes. When you install Arch Linux, yes, you have Arch installed nowadays, and that can automate some of the process. You can automatically install GNOME, automatically install a bunch of these various different packages. But even with Arch install, there's going to be random little components that either you didn't install during Arch install because you just didn't know you needed them, or were not an option to install. If you approach it like I did, which was a bare TTY with basic tooling installed, you're on your own. And there are fantastic resources out there on how to learn Linux, how to learn about Arch, learn about the components you want. There are so many videos out there. I've made some of them. Other Linux creators have made some of them as well. Distros themselves have made some of them. But it is still on you to decide what it is you are going to care about. Personally, I started with i3 as my desktop back on X11, then went to BSPWM, then AwesomeWM, eventually trying out things like Sway, Hyperland, Neri, Cosmic to some extent, and nowadays I'm making use of KDE. But the desktop itself is just one aspect. This is something you're gonna have to decide which one that you like, but it's not the only thing to decide. Most distros, gaming is set up for you. Even on something like a Fedora or Ubuntu, most of what you need is kind of just there. There might be like, oh, you got to install Steam. Oh no, you've got to install one package. Then even less so on distros that are sort of just built around the idea of gaming. But if you're on a regular Arch Linux, there is some setup you need to do. Now, the setup is not hard, but there is some setup. You will have to enable multilib. You'll have to make sure you have the Vulkan drivers installed, and none of this is difficult, right? Like, all of this is stuff that is documented. All of this you can work out how to do, and once you know how to do it, it takes, like, I don't know, download time to install things. Like, if you have a decent connection, like 5 minutes to install things, 3 minutes to install things. But it's still something that isn't just handed directly to you. Whilst some things are handed to you, like systemd, for example, which you can replace, but you're probably not going to want to do so, what about your audio? Because you do get ULSA, but you're probably going to want, like, Pulse Audio or Pipewire, but maybe you also want to have Jack installed, and maybe you want to have some G-Stereo stuff, and do you want to use Pulse Audio, or do you want to use Pipewire? And if you want to use Pipewire, do you then want to have Jack working with Pipewire or Jack as a separate thing? Because that is an option, and these are choices that you can make. Do you want to set up printing? I don't have printing set up on my system because I don't have a printer. I don't have a printer in my house. I don't have a printer connected to this. I don't need to set up printing. Do you want to set up Bluetooth? I have a Bluetooth chip on my motherboard. I've never bothered to set up any of the tooling around it because I don't have any Bluetooth devices that I want to use with this system. I do have Bluetooth devices like, my controller. I just plug them in. These are options that you have to decide if you even want to go through them, because a lot of distros out there just do that for you. And that's great. That's easy. That's simple. And none of this is difficult. But at the same time, if you don't even know what it is you need to look for on how to set it up, it is going to be time consuming. Then there is the whole matter of the AUR, the Arch User Repository, which is something which, let's just take this package. This is something you shouldn't even be remotely touching. If you're not willing to go and click on this button here, wait for the Anubis prompt and understand what a package build actually is, how it works, and what it is that can go wrong with these. Because as we saw recently with the whole AUR malware situation, you can hide things on here in ways that are not exactly obvious. Now, this package, by all accounts, seems to be perfectly fine, but there are so many packages out there which, even if they're not malware, right, they might just be a little bit buggy. They might have a weird dependency missing, or the build script's not running properly. And if you know how the AUR works, if you know how a package build works, if you know a little bit about how to build software, you don't have to wait for somebody to fix it. You can be that person. Then you have the fact that sometimes, even when dealing just with the main repos, sometimes things go wrong, and sometimes they're handled in a way which I don't think they should be handled. This example is from 4 years ago, but even so, it still gets my point across. There was an issue with Grub a few years back where people weren't able to boot their system due to a bad update, and it was bad, right? And for about a week, Arch said absolutely nothing about this problem. Eventually, they did release a news post. They did explain how to fix it, but the reason that most people knew the problem was there and knew how to fix it wasn't because of Arch. It was because of people talking on the subreddit. It was actually because of the downstream distros who were also affected by the problem. I think at the time it was Garuda and EndeavourOS that both had full documentation on how to deal with this, but Arch, the place that first had the problem, the place that caused the problem, didn't say anything about it until well after the problem was dealt with. Nowadays, things have gotten a little bit better in that respect, but there are still these cases where sometimes Arch breaks something, and sometimes Arch doesn't say a word about being broken. This is the main reason why I don't recommend Arch to new people. You're gonna have to deal with problems by yourself. You're gonna have to look it up. You're gonna have to actually learn. A lot of the time, things are just, even if they should be, are not being explained in a way, in a place that makes any sense whatsoever. But we've spent a lot of time on the first point. Let's move to the second one. You require support for an architecture other than x86-64. So there are spin-offs of Arch Linux that do support other architectures. For example, there is an ARM spin-off, Arch Linux ARM. And this has been in discussion for a while. There has been work on supporting other architectures. And with the recent work for supporting SteamOS on the Steam frame, this is work being done by Collabora and Valve together, and is work which has been open sourced and possibly, maybe, is gonna get upstreamed into the Arch Linux project. this may not necessarily be the case for that much longer. Maybe it will stay in like an external thing. Maybe there'll be like a new kind of Arch Linux ARM or something else like that. But this very well may be changing. However, if you need something like 32-bit x86, for that you'd have to go to Arch Linux 32, and that is something which is very much not coming back to mainline Arch Linux. That is something which most distros have been phasing out, whilst Arch Linux does still have the multi-lib packages. When we're talking about full 32-bit CPU support, no, that's going away everywhere. Let alone random other architectures out there like PowerPC and other things like that. There might be some random spin of Arch that does it, but mainline Arch, definitely not. You take a strong stance on using a distribution which only provides free software as defined by GNU. I've already touched on this with gaming with Steam, but when you look at a distro like Fedora Linux, for example, you will notice that a bunch of things like NVIDIA drivers, like Steam, and a bunch of other random stuff, they're not in the main Fedora repos. Instead, they're in something known as RPM Fusion. This is basically the repo of Fedora where they just don't want to deal with things. This is the legally separate repo where it's let's just pretend like it's not over there. They'll talk about it, they'll document it, but it is technically separate from main Fedora. And Fedora has both a moral and legal reason for not wanting to touch this software. Distributing this software is questionably legal at best. No one really cares, but like terms of the actual software, questionably legal. Plus the software is not free software, and Fedora wants to have primarily free software wherever they can. Arch Linux, though, isn't like that. Yes, there are a bunch of things not in the main repos, but those aren't in the main repos and instead in the AUR, not for a ethical concern. It's more of a practical concern where there are only so many maintainers. Those maintainers only want to work on certain things. So if there's no one to maintain it for the main repos, it's just not going to be in the main repos. But things like Steam, totally fine. The NVIDIA drivers, totally fine. Now, there are distros based in Arch Linux which are very free software focused. They only have free software. Things like Parabola, like Hyperbola. But Arch Linux itself, it's not that. Arch Linux is more about a practical approach to this free software where we're going to have free software in the base system. We're going to primarily have free software. But we live in a world where sometimes you want things which are proprietary. So if somebody wants to maintain the package, you know, Discord is available. You believe an operating system should configure itself, run out of the box, and include a complete default set of software and desktop environment on the installation media. Now, of course, this does not apply to distros like CashOS, distros like Garuda or EndeavourOS. They do include all of that software out of the box. You install it, or even just you run it off your USB, you're going to have all of this stuff available. If you run Arch Linux off of a USB, do you know what you're going to get? A TTY. Now, you do have Arch install, and you can, you know, install Arch through that, or you can do your manual installation, or if you want to, you could go and install a bunch of packages in that live CD environment. There's nothing stopping you doing that. It's just out of the box. The ISO you get, it's Arch Linux. It's made as a media to install Linux, and if something goes wrong, as a way to recover your system, get access to tooling, fix it from the live CD, and then go back into your main system. But unlike something like Ubuntu, which has the desktop it ships, that is GNOME. Unlike Fedora Workstation, which has the desktop it ships, which is GNOME, or Fedora KDE, which is KDE, Arch Linux doesn't have the DE it supports. It has Cinnamon, it has KDE, it has Hyperland, i3, Niri, Trinity, probably, I don't know, maybe that's in the AUR. It has, did I say Cinnamon? It has all of these different environments, and you could just pick one and say, okay, this is the GUI you get for testing Arch Linux. But it's not really testing Arch Linux, because the experience you get when you actually install Arch is going to be entirely different. So unless you want the ISO to have every single desktop available and install everything for you, and the ISO to be like 15 gigabytes, which I don't think anyone actually wants, it makes more sense to just be a TTY, and if you need a GUI in the live environment, you can just install the package. Arch is not for you if you do not want a rolling release GNU Linux distribution. I love them, right? That is one of my key things I look for in a distro I'd even remotely consider using, at least on my main system. On like a gaming system or a laptop, something else like that, maybe I decide something else. Arch Linux has the benefit of constantly getting new updates, and has the downside of constantly getting new updates. Especially when you're dealing with the AUR, you will sometimes find that things break. A package version misaligns with the dependency expected by that AUR package. And when that happens, now you've got to deal with that yourself. You've got to manually uninstall it or modify the package to expect a different version range, and it will break something eventually if you use the AUR enough. Typically, this doesn't happen with core Arch Linux main repo packages, but you will have other issues. Sometimes Arch Linux is the first distro to see a regression. Sometimes Arch Linux is the place where new features are found to be broken. And yes, sometimes you'll find them on Gentoo and various other rolling distros as well, but Arch is the most popular of the rolling distros, and a lot of the issues that you don't have to deal with if you're on Ubuntu, if you're on Fedora, if especially you're on Debian. That's because a lot of those issues are found by people on distros like Arch Linux. Now, you don't have to update every single day. Usually I'm once a week, sometimes it even gets out longer, like every couple of weeks or once a month. But inevitably, the day will come when you update, and that day a new package version came out, that day something is a little bit broken, and that day no one else has yet to publish anything on it, and you are left in the dark dealing with the problem yourself. And lastly, the most important reason, you're happy with your current OS. If you like what you're using, you like Fedora, you like OpenSUSE, you like Hannah Montana Linux, you like, I don't know, Nyarch, Parabola, Gentoo. If you like it, hey, there's no reason to switch. Now, you might be wondering what this one here is. Why would I want to use Arch? Because Arch is the best. What does this link go to? Well, basically a hello world for Arch is the best in various different languages. Because why not? This will just keep going. I'm going to speed it up. There's quite a few in here, as you might be able to tell. So at the end of the day, use whatever distro you like. I like Arch Linux. I would like other people to like Arch Linux as well. But if it's not for you, it's not for you. So, if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and go hype if you're on mobile. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Silly Bear Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and don't hit your head on the arch.